Rejected Moon, Episode 3, The Border, written by Mia. I did not sleep, and the eyes did not leave, and somewhere in the long, cold middle of the night, I stopped being afraid of them and started being something more dangerous, which was curious. That is the thing no one warns you about being looked at when you have spent your whole life being looked through. That the first creature to truly see you can ask almost anything of you, simply by continuing to look. I stood at the window with the bitten moon cold against my breastbone and watched the silver eyes watch me, and the warmth in my chest turned and turned, not afraid, leaning, always leaning, toward the fire, toward the bond, and now toward this, and I understood that Mara's warning that afternoon had not been a general one. She had known exactly who would be standing in my tree lean before the moon was old. At the first gray hint of dawn, the eyes lowered and blinked and were gone. Not fled, withdrawn. The way a tide goes out, with the unhurried certainty of a thing that means to come back. I let out a breath I had been holding for what felt like hours and found my legs had gone stiff beneath me. I should have spent that night planning, or praying, or grieving. Instead, I spent it learning the shape of being watched and finding, to my shame, that I did not entirely hate it. I would step back from the window and the warmth in my chest would tug, gently, as if to say go back, and I would go back, and the silver eyes would still be there, patient in the dark, and something in me that had been hungry for 19 years would settle a little lower in its bones. Near the worst hour of the night, I spoke to it, once, feeling like exactly the kind of madwoman the pack thought Mara was. "I know you're there," I said to the dark, and the eyes had blinked slowly once, the way you answer a child you do not want to frighten. It was the most honest exchange I had had in months. I'd had it with a pair of eyes and a tree lean, across the boundary of everything I knew, and that told me more about the size of my life in Greywater than I wanted to learn at dawn. He came back at dusk, but this time he came as a man. I had spent the day learning the croft the way you learn a cell, where the wind came through, where the south wall held the day's warmth, the 40 paces east to the leaning rock and the clean spring behind it, exactly as Cale had said. I was at that spring, filling the clay jar in the blue last light, when the quality of the quiet changed, and I turned, and he was standing at the edge of the trees with his hands open at his sides to show me they were empty. I knew him at once, the man from the tunnel. The one who had bowed to the unchosen Omega on the amphitheater floor while 300 people looked at me like a thing gone wrong. He was tall in a way the Greywater men were not. Not bulk, but length, a rangy, economical strength, and he held himself with the stillness of someone who has never once in his life had to make himself small. His hair was dark, his eyes the pale gray silver of the wolf's, and there was gray at his temples, though his face was not old. He wore traveling leathers with no pack mark I knew, and he looked at me the way he had looked at me across the stone, as though I were the end of a long journey. "You're a hard person to reach alone," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, with an accent that bent the vowels in a way I'd never heard. "Your alpha keeps lifting his traps and setting new ones. I've spent 2 nights convincing your tree lean I'm not worth howling about." You were the wolf. My hand had gone to the pendant under my dress without my deciding it, last night. I was. He inclined his head, that same small bow, and this close it undid something in me to receive it. Ronan, of Nightreach, past the eastern ridge, 3 valleys east, where this land stops pretending to belong to anyone. A faint dry humor moved at the edge of his mouth. "We felt you for nights ago. The whole of Nightreach felt you. A note went through the mountains like a struck bell, and every wolf for 100 miles lifted their head at the same instant and looked west toward a poor little pack no one has thought about in a generation. The humor went out of him. And then it stopped, very suddenly, the way a light goes out when someone afraid of it puts their hand over the flame. I came to see what had been bright enough to wake the mountains, and whether it had survived having a hand put over it. I should have been frightened. A strange alpha at my spring at dusk, knowing things about me I did not know about myself. But the warmth in my chest had gone quiet and certain, the way it had gone quiet at the ember, and I was so tired of being told what I was by people who would not say it to my face. They sent me here, I said, because they don't have a word for me. The elders. They put me at the edge, so they wouldn't have to look at the thing they can't name. I know what you are. He said it simply, without weight, and that was somehow worse than if he had made it a marvel. I knew the moment the moon flared and didn't break you. There are perhaps 4 people left alive who would. I am, unfortunately for you, one of them, and the others are not kind. Then say it. My voice cracked on the words. Everyone keeps standing in front of me with the shape of it in their mouth. Mara, the elders, you, and no one will just say it. What am I? Ronan was quiet for a moment. The light was almost gone. The first stars were out over the ridge. When he spoke, he chose the words the way you choose stones to cross a river. You are the last of a line the world agreed to forget, he said. Once before the Pax, the moon did not choose mates. It chose heirs, wolves it poured itself into directly, the way it poured itself into you 4 nights ago. They were called the Moonborn, and they were not alphas, and an alpha rejecting one is rather like a candle deciding to put out the sun. He let that sit. They were hunted to nothing a long time ago by people who found a world with the moon's own blood walking in it too difficult to control. I believed the last of them died in the snow before I was born. I was wrong by exactly 1 generation. His pale eyes held mine. You are not an Omega, Ren. You never were. You are the thing the Omega rank was invented to make sure nobody went looking for. He must have seen the disbelief, because he gave me the rest of it plainly, the way you set down a heavy thing you have carried too far. They were the peace once, he said. When the Pax warred, and Pax always wore, it was a Moonborn who walked out between the lines, because no alpha's compulsion touched them and no warrior would spill the moon's own blood in front of the moon. They couldn't be ruled, so they couldn't be bought, so they couldn't be made to lie. Do you understand how dangerous that is to the kind of men who run the world? A creature that cannot be made to lie. His mouth went hard. So those men wrote a better story, that the Moonborn were a sickness in the blood, that a light like yours was a plague fire, and the merciful thing, the holy thing, was to put it out wherever it kindled. They called themselves the Argent Council. They made the hunting into a duty, and they were so patient and so thorough and so well believed that within 3 generations the word Moonborn meant nothing but a tale to frighten pups away from the dark. He looked at me steadily. You are that tale, walking around in a borrowed dress, lighting embers in a shepherd's croft. And the men who built their whole authority on you being only a story are not going to enjoy being proven liars. I want to tell you I was strong that night at the spring, that I heard the truth of what I was and rose to it. What I actually did was sit down hard on the wet stone beside the leaning rock because my legs had stopped believing in me, and I put my face in my hands, and for the first time since the ceremony I wept, not for the rejection which I was discovering I could carry, but for the 19 years. For every meal eaten in the gaps between elbows. For the careful smallness I had folded myself into, fist around a candle, when all that time there had been a sun in me, and I had been taught to apologize for the warmth. Ronan did not come closer. He did not touch me, did not soothe, did not do any of the things a man does when he wants something from a crying woman. He simply lowered himself to sit a respectful distance off, his back against a tree, and waited, and let me have it, the way you let weather pass. When I was done, the night had come down full and cold and starred, and I was emptied out and oddly clear. "You want me to come to Nightreach?" I said. "Yes. Because of what I am. Because the moon's blood walking in your territory makes you stronger than the people who'd hunt me. Because a queen at your fire is worth 3 valleys of trouble." I lifted my head and made myself look at him, and I made my voice as flat and clear as I could. Mara told me to learn the difference between someone wanting what I am and someone wanting me. She said I'd have to learn it faster than was fair. So I'm asking, and I'd like you not to lie, because I think I'd be able to tell. Which is it? Something crossed his face, surprise, and then, unmistakably, respect, the clean kind, the kind that costs the person giving it something. "Both," he said. "I won't insult you by pretending the first isn't true. What you are could change the shape of every pack between here and the sea, and I'd be a fool not to know it, and I am not a fool." He paused. But I sat in that amphitheater meaning to look at a weapon, and I watched a girl in a borrowed dress get refused under the open sky and not let it bend her, and stand up and ask the only honest question in the whole stone bowl. What's happening to me, to the one old woman who'd ever been kind to her? And I stopped thinking about weapons. His mouth twisted, rueful, at himself. "So, both. And I'll spend as long as it takes letting you decide which one you choose to believe, because you've earned the right to be suspicious of every soft thing anyone says to you for the rest of your life, and I won't be the man who punishes you for using it." It was, I would realize later, exactly the right thing to say, and the fact that it was exactly right was itself a thing to be suspicious of. But that night, raw and emptied and 19, I let myself be warmed by it anyway. "I'm not coming," I said. "Not yet." He went still. "Ren. This is the only home I've ever had, and it's a bad one, and the people in it are afraid of me, and one of them cut me open in front of everyone I know." I stood, slowly, my legs mine again. And it's still mine. I'm not going to be carried out of it in the dark 3 valleys to a fire I've never seen, on the word of a man who admits he came for a weapon. If I leave Greywater, I'll leave it on my own feet, in my own time, because I chose it. I almost smiled. Mara said the moon only lights the door. The choosing is the part that's mine. I'm keeping it. For a long moment, Ronan looked at me, and then he did the last thing I expected. He laughed, low and short and genuinely delighted, and inclined his head a 3rd time, deeper than before. "There she is," he said, almost to himself. He reached into his collar and drew out something on a thong, a small gray whistle carved from horn, and set it on the leaning rock between us, not handing it to me, leaving the choosing in my hands. "When you're ready, or when you're in trouble, and you'll be in trouble, Ren, sooner than you think, because the same note that reached Nightreach reached east as well as west, and there are riders on the east road who do not bow." He rose. The dark seemed to gather to him. "Blow it, and I'll come from wherever I am, faster than anything with 4 legs has a right to. That's not a courtship. That's a debt I'm choosing to owe the last of a line my people failed once already. Don't lose it." And then the man was a wolf again, vast and silver and silent, and the Trilene took him, and I was alone at the border of the only world I knew, with a dead woman's broken moon at my throat and a stranger's whistle cold in my fist. I should have slept well that night, knowing even a little of what I was. Instead, I woke before dawn with the warmth in my chest clenched tight and wrong, like a fist, and the bell note ringing again at the very edge of hearing, but this time it was not coming from me. I climbed the top of the leaning rock in the gray light and looked east, the way Ronan had warned, down the long pale thread of the east road where it came out of the hills toward Greywater. Riders, 3 of them, unhurried, in the colorless light. They wore gray, not the soft gray of the elders' robes, but a hard pale gray, the gray of iron weathered to bone, and even at that distance there was something wrong about the way the land lay quiet under them, the birds gone silent in a moving circle around their passage. I had known their name for less than a night, and already I knew them on sight, the way you know a snake you have never seen before. The gray they wore was not a banner. It was a refusal, the color of something that had decided, long ago, to feel nothing. Where they passed, the morning simply stopped. No birdsong, no wind moving in the grass, as though the land had learned across long centuries to hold very still and wait for the iron gray to go by. They did not hurry, because the thing they hunted could not outrun a struck bell in their own teeth. They had been doing this, I understood, since before Greywater had a name. They had ridden down my grandmother's grandmother and called it Mercy, and slept soundly after. And the part of me that had wept at the spring the night before, the part that was finally, dangerously awake, did not feel afraid as I watched them come up the pale road. It felt something I had no right to feel, a girl alone on a rock with a borrowed whistle and a dead woman's broken moon. It felt the cold, clean, unfamiliar weight of fury. At their head rode a tall figure on a gray horse who did not look left or right because they did not need to, because they were following something they could feel, a struck bell in the teeth, a light that had been bright enough to wake the mountains 4 nights ago and had then, foolishly, stupidly, survived. They were riding straight for the hollow, for Braun, who kept the records and would tell them anything to make them leave, for Cale, who would have to choose, in front of his frightened pack, between the girl he had thrown away and the riders in iron gray who had come to collect her. And the gray whistle was in my hand, and Ronan was 3 valleys east, and the next full moon, the one Mara swore would change everything, was still 2 weeks away. I climbed down off the leaning rock, and my hands were steady, which surprised me more than anything else that strange gray morning. The horn whistle was warm. I had been gripping it without knowing. I did not lift it to my lips, though every nerve I owned was telling me to. The riders were still an hour from the fences, and there was one thing I needed to know before I called a stranger's debt down onto the only home I had, one thing that mattered more, just then, than my own life. I needed to know whether the Alpha, who had refused me under the open moon, would stand in that road for me, or step out of it and let the iron gray pass. To be continued. That was episode 3 of Rejected Moon. If the moon has you now, the next episode is waiting. Subscribe so you don't lose the trail. The complete book is available on Amazon, and early episodes and bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
I'm Mia.
Thank you for listening.